What's up, folks? Welcome to the channel. Today I'm very excited to be talking with one of my favorite mandolin players and dear friends, Andrew Collins from Toronto, Canada. And you probably know his work from the many projects that he's played in, including the Creaking Tree String Quartet, the Foggy Hogtown Boys, his solo records, his work with his Andrew Collins Trio. You also may have seen his Isolationist Guide to the Mandolin Workshop series that's been happening online over the past couple years since we've been stuck at home. So really excited to hang with you, Andrew. Thanks so much for being here.
You make it sound like I'm busy, but you are the guy that everyone is measuring what busy means by.
Those Isolationist Guide to the Mandolin Workshops have been like one of my favorite things over the past couple years. I was just thinking back to that episode that I got to be a part of. I was marooned over in Northern Ireland with nothing to do, and it felt really special just to be able to get together with so many mandolin friends and get to talk about the thing that we love while the world was turned upside down. I was just curious, like, what gave you the idea to start that series?
So when everything was locked down, I saw so many people I know and musicians who were doing like live streams with their iPhone in a room. And I'm an aesthetic. I mean, it's up to others to decide if I've got a good aesthetic, but I'm really aesthetically in tune. And first, I found them to be hard to watch, like visually. And secondly, for myself, all of my music just about has been dependent on collaboration and playing with people. And I have done some solo gigs over the years, but it's just not where my strength or my interest lay. So I had this idea of doing like these festival style workshops that I thought was a more compelling idea, where I'm getting collaborators with me and each person gives a chance to, you know, perform a tune and open it up to the audience to answer questions. And yours was actually the maiden voyage. I didn't know that if it was even going to work or not. I mean, having someone like yourself and Joe Walsh, who are very out there in the instructional, in what I call the mandolin geek world. I'm a mandolin geek, so hopefully no one's taking offense to that.
Not at all.
You guys helped get it off the ground for sure, and Adrian with the Slow Can Ramblers, like that was the four of us. And the response was so great that I was like, maybe I'll try and do some more. And, you know, they continued to develop interest, and the next one was a straight ahead bluegrass one with Reichman and Compton and Chris Henry, and the one that was, I'd say, the most successful and the biggest surprise to me was the new acoustic one with Jacob Jolliffe and Matt Flinner and the dog himself, Grisman, the man who started it all for me. His being interested in it at all was a surprise, but his level of interest, he actually brought a lot of energy to even the pre-production of it. He was really quick in getting transcriptions to me, quicker than anyone actually, and in fact sent me a transcription and then decided that he wanted to correct it or improve it and redid it and sent it another to me. So he was really encouraging. And slowly I tried doing, maybe I'll do like just an instructional one rather than like a festival style workshop one. And the response to that was great. You know, when you're doing 3 other mandolin players every other week, you start to run out of the mandolin players you know. I really love teaching, and I like teaching privately, like one-on-one, but I feel like my strength is more in teaching classes in large groups. I really, really enjoy that. So the series kind of evolved from there, and then I'd pick, rather than a stylistic topic, picked all kinds of topics like speed playing and harmony playing and how to learn and like all these different aspects of learning the mandolin, and it's been really fun. My wife had been on me pre-pandemic. She's like, oh, you should write a book because you teach at lots of camps and have some instructional material, and I was like, I don't even know how interesting books are to people at this point. And
so
and in the last year and a half, I've done something like 15 2-hour instructional workshops. So I've got a lot of instructional material now.
Wow. I was just thinking about that recently, how because of, you know, the global situation right now and how things have changed over the past couple of years, it's got to be different, like, moving forward. And I think there's definitely some good things about being more online. I was just a part of this modern mandolin workshop that Jake Sheps put together back in November, just a weekend camp, and all on Zoom. Everyone was tuning in from different places. What was, I think, really special about it was access to all these amazing instructors that may not have been able to come or have wanted to come for a whole weekend, who could just tune in for like an hour or two from their living room.
If you can take a 2-hour workshop from the comfort of your own home and be able to go back to it and have the materials all delivered, why would you not want to take advantage of that if you could study with, someone you really want to study with and not have to go somewhere?
Totally, yeah. I remember going to camps as a kid, and I had like one of those Zoom H4n recorders before I had a smartphone that had a recording device, and trying to record, what all these instructors were telling me, inevitably losing all those files and not remembering anything that I learned. And so like now having video evidence of all these amazing courses is, I think, really amazing for sure. But I don't know. Do you think there's any like cons to stuff moving more online these days?
I don't think it's a replacement for being somewhere. I love bluegrass camps and mandolin camps, but to me, such a huge part of that is the fact that you're not just getting lessons. I mean, that is great, but you're surrounded by a community of people that are all as into this thing, whether it's bluegrass specifically or the instrument that you're playing, and the level of inspiration that you get from that, it just doesn't compare to a video or a live show. I like things to look good, and I want the aesthetic on video to look good, but there's no replacement for what it's like to have the three-dimensional experience. So the downside would be if it were to replace actual live interaction. But I don't think it does that. We talk about photography when we talk sometimes, and the analogy that I love to give is, if you try to take a picture of your mandolin, almost always what you will get is all this like glare from the light that your eyes actually filter out when you're looking at it. Like, you actually don't even see it when you're looking at it, but you take a picture of it and it's all there as part of the image and you can't filter it out. And I feel like recorded music is the same. Like, when you are there in a live show, in the experience, the spontaneity of what's happening and all the different things that go into the experience, you're actually continuing in creating the sound in your mind. Right. So like, a great analogy is if you've ever been to like a rock show that's really loud and it sounds great, you're loving it while you're there, and you hear a recording of the same show, and all this super loud stuff is just like captured onto an analog thing, and you start to hear how out of tune the singers were, or all these blemishes that, partly because of the volume actually compressing your eardrum, you're filtering all this stuff out and really getting like what I believe is the essence of the music. And when it's filtered through this other medium, you are not able to filter things out in a natural way, like the glare of the light on the mandolin when you're trying to take a picture of it. So yeah, the live experience to me is still infinitely more real and interactive. So I hope it doesn't replace it.
Oh, real talk here. Like, confession, when I was a little kid, first starting to play mandolin, I wanted to be like Chris Thile, of course, like all young mandolin players do. And I'd try listen to other mandolin players just because I knew it would be good for me to listen to folks like David Grisman or Mike Marshall or whoever. And I never really latched onto it the same way until going to the Mandolin Symposium as a teenager and getting to hear all these amazing players in person. And all of a sudden, like, it made sense. It connected with me in a real way just because I could see them tangibly in front of me and hear them and see what they were doing. And it's a different experience, and your brain kind of fills in the blanks in a different way, I feel like.
Yeah. What is most important to me as an instructor or even as a student is really what you're giving is inspiration. And hopefully what the students are getting out of it is, a sense that things are possible, and an idea that, oh, this is how I can work on whatever it is that I can't do at this time. But really, it's just inspiration. I mean, I even feel like private lessons, when I teach a student regularly, all you're doing is feeding them. Yes, you're giving them stuff that will help them become a better player, and hopefully a system for being able to learn on their own. But the most important thing is not the stuff that you're giving, but actually energizing them to practice and be inspired to practice something that they might not feel on their own.
I've heard you talk about too how I don't know, I experience this as well. I go through seasons where I feel super inspired to play, and I'll be playing hours and hours a day, and it feels like I can't get enough of playing the mandolin just because I'm so excited to learn. Then other times, like I even feel over the past couple years since being at home, I felt less inspired to practice. And do you feel that way sometimes? Like, what do you do to push through some of those valleys in your progress as a musician, so to speak?
Well, it's hard. Like, you cannot keep energy up without reward, in my opinion. And like when I'm teaching students, I try to encourage people to work on their weaknesses as much as possible. So like, if you're always working on the things you're good at, there becomes more disparity between your strength and weaknesses. But you can't just work on your weaknesses all the time and have it be fun, right? If you're only working on the things that are going to take long time to improve on or are not super fun, which is usually why they're weaknesses in the first place, it's really hard to keep self-motivating, keep your interest up. So for me, I have like tunnel vision. When I'm into something, I really get into it and everything else sort of falls away. And I've had times in my life where playing and practicing have fallen away and it has become, I mean, I say this with a grain of salt, a job, you know, a job that I love, but not feeling like I'm improving at the instrument or even trying to. When I got into recording engineering, the pendulum kind of swung to producing and recording more. And it was at a time when Creaking Tree String Quartet had come to an end, and Foggy Hogtown Boys couldn't tour because there's a band member that had a full-time job, and so I wasn't touring as much, and I was playing less and less and more into recording engineering. And there were times where, yeah, I was feeling pretty rough on the mandolin, and actually, like when I was playing gigs, not enjoying, feeling so out of my game. But it was really hard to motivate to get inspired again. And strangely enough, the thing that brought me back was getting into pool. I've played pool at various times in my life, and I kind of got into it with my wife when we first met at a bluegrass camp, actually. When she moved to Toronto, we went out and played pool one night, and she was kind of good, and it kind of kicked off a few years of being like super focused on pool. I even got a pool table in my studio and was practicing. Nice. And just the feeling of practicing something that was super fun and getting to enjoy just improving on something that had nothing to do with my livelihood was really reinvigorating. And shortly into this, I was hired to play music with a musical hero of mine, Kevin Bright, who's like this monster mandolinist. I mentioned him to you before. Incredible everything, actually. And he's got such unique technique and approach, like not coming from a bluegrass world. He did a couple albums of all mandolin family stuff, and to be able to play it, he hired myself, Jesse Cobb, and Adrian Gross as the band. And to learn this material, like it was like I had to really learn techniques that were not familiar to me, and it reignited this love of practicing mandolin. And shortly after this, the trio started to tour more and more, and like I never wanted to be a band leader, so even trying to make the trio like a touring busy act was not really an interest for me because I just didn't want to be a band leader. But we started gigging, and the music that I do in new acoustic music often is about trying to push myself. So like learning how to play the repertoire that I've written often forces me to get better. So I'm not getting better to get better. I'm getting better to be able to play the goal. And so once that new love of mandolin was reignited, and this is like 7-8 years ago, it just continued. So over the last 8 years, I've been as inspired about mandolin. Maybe not as I was in the first 5 years when I was practicing like 8 hours a day. I just don't have the time to be able to do that. But I'm working on technique stuff that I stopped working on for years and years, and like I've actually changed my right hand, like how the pick hits the string in the last few years. Actually, partly inspired by you. That album, Golden Angle, and I was on the road and I was listening to Thile's partitas and sonatas, and I noticed this thing in his playing that I'd never keyed on before. You know, the mandolin solo, so I could really hear how his pick is hitting the string in a way, and I've always like been familiar of him allowing the pick to like wobble in his finger sort of thing. But what I noticed, and I think I hear something similar in your playing as well, is I spent so much of my life thinking about how the pick hits the string and never thought about how the pick releases from the string, which is like half the sound. And I started noticing this sound of, on the up and down strokes, of his pick like actually sliding off the string rather than like clicking the string. And yeah, it's a sound that I've been chasing and working on ever since. Do you think about that?
I do, a little bit. Actually, it was partly inspired by Dan Voigt, luthier in Nashville. I don't know if you've ever worked with him before. He's a great guy, and he builds these armrests that I've been talking about on the channel recently. But he is a great player too, and I think he was the first person to tell me to see if I could like hold the pick with as little possible pick actually in my fingers, with a lot of pick showing, I guess.
I talk about that in when I'm teaching technique as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's
counterintuitive though, isn't it?
Right, it is. Yeah, but I think it helps you zero in on those points of contact, like the bookends of the start of the note and the end of the note when the pick meets and leaves the strings. Like the analogy I try to give, it's kind of like you're trying to move your hand as if it was underwater. That's the image that comes to mind. And the pick kind of being an extension of your hand, you want it to have this graceful resistance almost, where, you know, there's no starting and stopping motions, no jerking. It's all just like this one fluid motion as the pick goes through the strings. But yeah, is that your approach too, holding the pick like a little bit?
Yeah, so originally I thought holding close to the tip meant that you had a better grip on the pick and it was easier to hold. But to do this, you're actually trying to resist the pick from wobbling in your fingers, which takes more strength. And if you've got that fulcrum, like that point of contact closer to the tip, if the tip wobbles, it exaggerates how much mass of the pick above that point of contact where you're holding it you're trying to resist or keep a hold on. Whereas if you grip it like way away from the tip, the pick can actually move a lot, and what is actually being held in your fingers barely moves. So you can actually have this more relaxed grip and have more control at the same time, even though it seems counterintuitive because you're further away from the action. And over the last couple years or few years, this idea of trying to get the down and upstroke to sound as similar as possible, and getting that sound of, like, you can hear a little rub against the strings. I mean, I'm trying to exaggerate it for the microphone. If you listen to that Thile Partitas and Sonatas, it's almost as if he's pulling the string with the pick rather than hitting it. And so there's like less resistance. And I mean, like I said, I interpret what I hear. I mean, I'm not saying that you're thinking about that, but when that Golden Angle, that was the first album that like I started, actually not started, the only album that I've actually lifted other mandolin tunes in the last 10 years, really.
Oh man. That's I feel chuffed, man. I'm so honored. I don't know. I definitely hit a lot of roadblocks with my right hand too. I try to do what feels most natural though, and a lot of people give me flack for using my forearm instead of my wrist, like most modern players do. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
Oh, I'm two techniques. I've got my regular technique and speed technique. And my speed technique is the forearm technique. There are times where I've tried to kick it, but I've also decided, like in the classical world, there are amazing classical players that are also forearm technique. And while Thile's right hand is to me like the epitome of efficiency, everyone's built slightly differently. And to me, the speed technique is like taking your tremolo technique and learning how to play eighth notes with it. I don't suffer from pain or hurting myself from having the forearm thing. Everyone has different hands, you know, like Jacob Jolliffe, who also has like ridiculously amazing right hand technique. It's so different than Thile's. Or Emery Lester, who also has ridiculously efficient right hand technique. I mean, his is like twisting like this. I could never imagine. I've explored it, but it would be like learning a totally new instrument. And then you reach the point is like, well, why don't I just take the technique that I use and make it cleaner and improve on it, which you could do infinitely.
I think so too. Yeah. And I for a long time wanted to, you know, like I said, wanted to be like Chris Thile, and I tried to do everything that he did and realized like, okay, I feel more natural doing it this other way. I'm not experiencing pain, and I kind of like the way that it sounds, and it sounds maybe a little bit different than Chris Thile, hopefully. And why not lean into that, make it like your style, and if it feels natural, then it's gonna come across the most naturally, I feel like, to the listener too.
When I went to IBMA early in my mandolin playing, I actually was playing with Emery Lester at the time. So the first couple times I was down there was with Emery. And, you know, there's no one in Canada, like, I wasn't around a lot of mandolin players. So beside my, like, close friends, like, I wasn't worried about other people sounding like Thile if that was my goal. And, and it kind of was for a little while. I'd already ruined that chance of being a Thile clone by, you know, I started off being a Grisman clone and then discovered Marshall and Flinner and Sam Bush. So there were a lot of mandolin players that had already lifted, that were already in my playing and the foundation of what I was doing. But I got down to IBMA and came across all these 12-year-old kids that sound just like Thile. And I'm like, oh, there's no need for me to go there. There are going to be lots of players that do this way better than me, beyond the fact that Thile already is there. And, you know, all these players that are patterning every aspect of their playing after Thile, they're never going to be Thile. If you're only learning from one person, then you're always going to be playing catch up to that person, particularly if that person's Thile. Whereas if you never had an original idea and only lifted 7 different mandolin players, you're going to have a unique sound because you're drawing all these things from all these other players. I mean, hopefully original ideas come into it as well.
Shifting gears here a little bit, but I know you've got a brand new recording that's coming out. It sounds great, man. I'm hoping we can maybe talk a little bit about it. Love Away the Hate. It's out April 5th, 2022. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
I love how this record, like, you're playing every single instrument on there, which seems like such a momentous feat to accomplish. You know, having all that work in front of you as a musician sounds like a little stressful, but also like a lot of fun too. What was your experience recording this?
Well, let me first say that for like bluegrassy type music, I tend to not like albums where one person plays everything. So even doing this was a real departure for me. And I think part of, you know, the isolation, like all this music was written over the last year and a half. And so it seemed to fit. It wasn't until a few weeks before recording that I decided to do it myself. I was actually thinking of just getting, you know, my close friends who live in town, great musicians, to be a band, and we'd bang this off in a day or two, because it's as simple music as I've ever recorded. In that it's tunes, it's very traditional, it's not trying to push genres or anything. But as it approached, I was like, you know, this will really fit where this album came from, and in some ways I think that this album is some of my most honest work, in that even though everything is multi-tracked and overdubbed, usually when I go in to record an album, I have all the arrangements like hardwired. I know when I'm improvising, I know when I'm not improvising. There's usually a lot of improvisation in it, but there's a lot of harmonies and structured things prearranged. And for this one, my goal was to make an album of all this material and not have it sound like one person did everything. So it's not trying to be like a show card where I can play this and I can play this. You know, let me backtrack a bit. The album that I'm trying to pattern, strangely enough, is actually Church Street Blues. Nice, and so Church Street Blues is like, if I'm talking about an album that is, you know, the most tasteful album I know, in my opinion, Church Street Blues is #1 for me. And the reason why is Tony, you know, he chops up the yin yang. He could do all this crazy new acoustic music. He could improvise like a monster. But all he did for this album is put the songs first. He came up with beautiful ways of playing the melodies. I'm not saying that the way he played the melodies are for the faint of technique. They're still challenging, but he never puts the technique ahead of the melodies and the song. So he just plays these songs beautifully. I mean, there are a few solos on the instrumental tunes, but otherwise it's just about playing the music as tastefully and musically as possible. So in doing this album, even though this is like an instrumental Mandolin family album, that was my goal. And I didn't plan anything. It was all like, as I was recording, trying to just go with my gut and not second guess. And So I didn't even know on most of them what the instrumentation was going to be. Sometimes I didn't, like when I started tracking, I didn't even know how many times I was going to play the melody through, if there's going to be a solo, if there wasn't. You know, I'd do a few takes just to a click, and through the course of those few takes, some ideas would materialize of what the arrangement is going to be. And then I just laid out all the melodies on the mandolin and one on the mandola, and then went about like augmenting it and kind of treated it, in most cases, kind of like backing up an Irish tune, where all the improvisation in like the Celtic music is often in the backup, not in the melody playing. And so I was kind of exploring that way and trying to strategize, not falling into the trap which often happens when people multi-track things, which is there are no dynamics. So I was really conscious of like, how am I going to build dynamics into this? Like, where are the parts that are going to open up or get more dense or get louder or quieter? And, you know, using my producer's hat, these are all the things I always think about when I'm recording an album, but I usually pre-plan them. Yeah, so over the course of 3 weeks, I just hacked away at it till it was done. It's so hard to step away from your own work, particularly when it's all you. So I don't know if it actually worked out. I think it did.
Yeah, definitely, man. It sounds great. I remember the first record that I did with Mile 12, we were so anal about preparing things in advance, and every note on that record was pre-planned. Like all the solos, all the fills, even like, you know, everything was put in position before we recorded. And listening back to that record, it almost feels like a little bit stale, but since getting some more experience in the studio since then, I've really enjoyed sitting somewhere in the middle between having an idea of what I want to communicate through the playing or through the arrangement, and then discovering it as you go through the recording process.
Yeah. It makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah, it does. It's so much fresher. And I've heard Brian Sutton say, like, there's a quote that they say in that band Hot Rise that he plays in, how we better record the song before we learn it too well. I kind of like that idea, that sentimentality, that if you have a closed mind going into the studio, it definitely feels a lot more stiff than if you're open to possibilities.
With Creaking Tree String Quartet, we did, our first album was a case where, you know, we were young and I wasn't even thinking about the music as much as I was thinking about mandolin specifically at that time. So I wanted to like inject all these things that were just on the edge of my technical abilities and worked up the ideas so that I could like be playing stuff that wouldn't come naturally out of my fingers.
Right.
Which I think is valuable. I mean, just like learning a tune that is really hard, it pushes your playing, and that's a wonderful thing. And we took it to our third album. We toured for almost a year. We wanted to be really prepared, and we were. And we went to the studio, and not one thing was a surprise to how it sounded. And
totally.
And by the time it came time to tour it after recording it, like, we were fatigued with the material and wanted new material, but we'd been playing it for like a year and a half. And then our next album was like the opposite extreme, where, you know, we did some focused rehearsing and went in and didn't have all the solos worked up, and, you know, had all the parts basically worked up, like the band stuff, but didn't have the solos worked up. And you know, having the most pyrotechnic solo doesn't always translate to the best music. And I discovered at that time that, when I'm playing bluegrass music, most of the time I'm not even playing music like bluegrass music, I'm playing mandolin. And I'm like, you know, trying to play these wicked eighth note solos, and you know, maybe they're good, but if you hear someone play straight eighth note solos all night, by the end of the night there's nothing new happening and there's no dynamics to it. Whereas if you hear someone actually playing the melody with some nice double stops or whatever, and like actually playing the melody, when they veer away from the melody, there's surprises, and it's like setting up the punchline to a joke. So I kind of discovered that, maybe the technique of the mandolin isn't, I mean, it's valuable and I love chasing it, but it isn't what makes, it isn't what makes Thile compelling to me. You know, he's got all that, but that's not all he does. He doesn't just like play a bunch of notes. He's incredibly musical and dynamic, and I mean, just the simple things that he does for the average mandolinist are really hard.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, like one of my big mandolin inspirations and teachers over the years have been Matt Flinner, and he definitely has kind of an understated sound, even though he can do all those fancy pyrotechnics like you mentioned too. But he said that when he was learning the mandolin, one of his big inspirations was listening to Miles Davis, who definitely has that understated, simple but beautiful aesthetic nailed down. And he was pointing me to some recordings where Miles would just play the melody all the way through the track, which is kind of unheard of, I think, in jazz history up to that point. And I definitely get that vibe from this new record, man. I just want to say I think the melodies are beautiful, the arrangements are straight ahead and deliver the meaning of the story of the song in, I think, really compelling ways. So I just think it's fantastic. Hope people check it out. I love in particular that track, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." I was wondering if you could talk about that one and the story behind that song.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the other thing about a lot of this material is because they're tunes, and most of them they were all written just me by myself. I really embraced trying to have the tunes reveal themselves to me. Like, so much of my new acoustic music, I'm trying to cleverly weave meaning in various ways to the notes and ways of pushing myself, with a technique or something. Whereas this, it was really I wanted the tunes to come to me. And in many cases, these tunes were 5 minutes of writing and not thinking a lot about it. And "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," it didn't have a name at first. It was really the day I recorded it, I was almost finished putting all of the melodies of the tunes down, and I knew that the mandola was going to be on this album a lot. In my mind, I was kind of treating it like the banjo of the album.
Nice.
It's in that sort of similar timbre, and I like the ringy sound. So I was kind of treating it in my mind like climber banjo. But I wanted to write a tune for the mandola and have it be the main melody instrument, which I didn't really do on any other track. So I just picked up the instrument, and this kind of weavy melody came. And something that I love about Thile that he incorporated in his melody playing is all this sort of cross-picking. It's not necessarily cross-picking, but using other strings to fill in the chord of the moment. So instead of it being, which is what the melody, as I see it, he would add these drone notes to fill in. And for this sort of Mixolydian melody, I just wanted to incorporate a heaviness to it. So I'm playing the mandolin right now, but this was on the mandola, which would be so every time that drone is happening, it's because it's falling in a similar place rhythmically. It actually sounds like there's, in my mind, in the old time modal world, some headbanging going on. So it just sort of appeared, this tune, and I wrote it that morning, then came into the studio and just started laying down the tracks for it. I really love the modal Mixolydian fiddle tune world. And Daryl Anger's got a lot of tunes like this, where it's a Mixolydian sort of meandering melody, where the melody is actually landing on the beat is not always predictable. And sort of this tune kind of was one of those where, how's it go? So that melody is a very simple melodic idea, but in the repeating of it, it actually falls in a different part of the beat, which gives it this weaving, undulating thing that I like in those types of tunes. Yeah. So I've written a whole bunch of them as well. At the time, there was, there's all this political stuff going on all around us, particularly at these times, and Canada was going through a pretty high moment of political unrest. And I've heard this phrase before, that the revolution will not be televised, and I felt like I was witnessing it, as the disparity of many different sides, perspectives, were so disparate from each other.
Speaking of these tunes, you've got a new transcription book that's in pair with this record that's coming out soon as well. When's that coming out?
Officially, it comes out on the 5th of April as well. The other thing about this album is so much of my music is not really jammable, like particularly the new acoustic music. Like, I wouldn't know how to jam it with people because pieces are so much influenced by the arrangement of them, and there aren't always like a repeating A part and B part, or like I said, the music is so much built around on an ensemble that not a lot of my music has been really jam friendly. You know, I've been so much more involved because of the Isolationist Guide stuff and just the last year and a half, so much more involved with the Mandolin geek world, that this album is really tunes and actually is jammable. So I thought I would, you know, take advantage of it and transcribe the book. And it's actually originally was supposed to be just a transcription of mandolin parts, but I also transcribed any mandola melodies and harmonies that I did as well. So it's actually a book of transcriptions for mandolin and mandola. And you know, I love the sound of mandolin harmonies, so there are tons of harmonies throughout this album, peppered here and there.
I know you're kind of a recording wizard here in the mandolin community. I was just wondering if you have tips for folks who are interested in recording at home, since like home recording is becoming, you know, more and more of a thing these days. Like, what are some tips for folks just getting started out? Some like cheap gear, mic placement setup, programs to use, anything that you have to offer?
Yeah. So okay, let's start off with the microphone in the room conversation. There is a huge difference from microphone to microphone in terms of tone. The thing that is most important for people to know is that your microphone, it's a tool, right? Like the camera you're using. You know, you can get incredible results with a really great camera, but you could get crappy results with a great camera if you don't know how to use it. And you can get incredible results with a not great camera if you know how to use it. With microphones, the most important thing to know is that where you place the microphone will affect the tone that you get. So some people, I've worked with engineers that, oh, it's a mandolin, I put the microphone here for mandolins, which is, in my mind, a totally dogmatic way of looking at it. Every mandolin sounds different. You know, one player might get a brighter tone on the same mandolin than another player. And recognizing that should encourage one to not approach it that way. And the method that I always use is I always get the mic placement by using my ears. So I'm soloing that microphone through headphones and moving it around to basically EQ the tone. None of the mic pre's that I use even have an EQ. I wouldn't use an EQ in recording. I just want to get the best tone by my mic placement. And there's this thing called proximity effect that is really exaggerated with condenser microphones. So the closer you get to the source, the darker the tone is. The further you get away from it, the brighter it will be, and the more room you get. So balancing proximity, for the mandolin, if I wanted to get a really dark tone, I'd have the microphone closer to the F holes. Whereas with the guitar, often it's really muddy close to the sound hole. So you kind of have to move the microphone away from it somewhere and balance out where you want to be. You know, if the microphone happens to be closer to where you're picking the strings, you're probably going to get more pick noise than if you want it further away. And these are aesthetic choices that you make when placing the microphone. The one piece of gear that I would recommend for like home recording, I got this Steinberg UR22C, which is about a $200 interface. Often these lower end converters would tend to be on the bright side to my ear. This one I got really for the live feed stuff for all these workshops, and I'm amazed at how good the mic pre's are in it for the buck. I mean, and when I A and B it compared to my studio rig, it's still hard to compare the two. But I have actually done a couple singles in the last year where I just used the UR22C and a couple Neumann KM84s, and it worked out. It was musical. So highly recommend it.
That definitely seems like the most important piece. You know, think about what would be the most bang for your buck. Go for like an interface first.
And like those Audio Technica mics are quality for a home recording type situation. They're, for the money, they're great. You know, if someone wants to get into, you know, they're performing live, I personally think the Neumann KM184 is one of the best microphones for live performance on the mandolin, and I love the tone. I would never record in the studio like this, but I love the tone of having the microphone like right in front of the F-hole.
Yeah.
So like right up there where it's really like it's almost unnaturally dark, but it speaks really well in a live situation. Nowadays I actually blend. I've actually gone the pickup route for the first time in my life.
Nice.
Like about a year and a half before the lockdowns. I got pickups in my mandolins and do the blending thing through one of those Felixes.
Oh yeah. Give us a rundown of your setup. I've got one of those as well. I've been doing kind of something similar, but I'm curious what you use.
Okay, so for the first 20 years of my playing live, I dogmatically believed that pickups just sounded like crap. So I never had a pickup in my mandolin. The mandolin isn't a very hard instrument to mic in a live context. So like for doing theater gigs or like concerts, we're fine, but honestly never had good sound on a festival stage. At Merlefest, yes, of course their sound crew is like amazing, so they had us nice and loud and there was no feedback and they have time for sound checks and stuff. But most festivals you don't even get a sound check. They just throw you on stage, and the engineers have been dealing with people with pickups all day, so they don't even know how to deal with feedback. And the other thing that I actually undervalued in all my years, I still don't use monitors. I don't like using monitors. I like hearing the house out front. I don't want my voice screaming back at me. I want to be able to hear the people on stage somewhat. But if we're in a loud festival, I'm going to hear... It won't sound as good behind the speakers, but I can hear what's going on in the mix from behind the speakers. So we can control our dynamics well, better, I believe, than if I had monitors going. But I've been on festival stages where it's so loud, what's going through the house, that it's feeding back anyway. So it was really for festivals that I first decided to go the pickup route. And I've got K&Ks in all my mandolins, my mandolin, mandocello, mandola, and I go into the Grace, which is the, you know, the Felix. For those that don't know, it's a 2-channel box that you can have 2 different pickups that you switch to and from, or you can use one of the inputs as a mic input and blend the 2, which is what I do. And honestly, it's got all these EQs on it, and the pickup, the K&K through the Grace, aside from like notching out like a little bit of the pick attack noise, which is about like 350, 400 hertz. Aside from that, it's basically flat. Now, it doesn't sound like an acoustic mandolin, but nor does playing through a microphone.
Yeah, it doesn't.
But it does sound a lot like a microphoned mandolin. And anytime I've been in festival situations where we're playing with other bands and everyone's screaming through monitors, I don't even use the microphone. I just use the pickup. And so another thing that I thought was the case with pickups is I thought that they crushed your dynamics, your ability to be able to play loud and quietly, and you just have to exaggerate with your hand. But the combination of using a microphone with a pickup, you've got all the ability to work a microphone the way you do without a pickup, but you also have the boost gain, the gain
changer
boost, which now I've got access. If I want to play really lightly but want to be heard, I can step on the boost. If I want to play hard bluegrass and like slam the mandolin, I don't need to, and I could just step into the microphone. It exaggerated the ability to play with dynamics in a way that I never thought would be the case. So even if I'm playing a quiet listening room, I now always go through the 2 channels, or I mean, I send out 1 channel to the sound person, and my sound has never been so consistently good now.
It's so cool to hear. I have like the exact same setup because I've got the K&K twin in this mandolin. I've got the Grace Felix. Before I was using like an Audio-Technica AT Pro 35 clip-on mic that I just clipped onto the armrest here and pointed to the bottom F-hole. But more recently started bringing the Neumann and putting it on a mic stand so that you have that freedom to kind of step into it, which has been so cool. And having the freedom to, the control over both those inputs to blend them together and send one output into the soundboard is just a game changer. It's so much better.
And they mess with your sound way less when you're sending it like that. I've never had such good sound on big festival stages as I did instantly from having this set up.
I love it. Yeah, it's definitely an expensive rig, but it's definitely has made sound checks like way less stressful.
Oh yeah, the K&Ks, I'm shocked at how little I have to do to make it sound how I want it to sound. So much so that, you know, with the trio, I play mandolin, mandola, mandocello. They all go into the same channel. They all sound exactly how I want them to sound without having to change settings or volume or anything.
That's great.
It's a pretty awesome situation.
I think my battery is almost shot, man. Maybe I should wrap things up here before it goes sour. But was there anything else you wanted to mention or talk about before we wrap up?
No. It's, you know, the only thing that we were talking about the different styles, and I mentioned like lifting some of your tunes. I just wanted to mention why. What it is about your music. I mean, I think you're really a great tunesmith as well, and like wonderful mandolin player. What I loved about your album was also like a personal thing in that I can hear in it the influences of your music predate Thile as well.
Oh, wow.
Do you know what I mean? And to me, it's like if someone plays bluegrass music, but they haven't even like checked out Monroe, you're missing a whole swath of what makes the music today sound like it. And similarly with new acoustic music, if you haven't checked out Sam Bush and David Grisman and arguably Flinner, I mean, that album View from Here was also a huge influence on my writing as well. Like just the tunes are so much a part of it. And yeah, like that's something that speaks to me, is hearing like this new acoustic mandolin album that actually has the history of the music embedded in it. I mean, I hear it in it. I mean, maybe I'm imposing it on my own thought, but I think I hear it.
Oh man, that really means a lot. Yeah, I feel like incongruent with all that stuff we're talking about with Thile obsession and impersonation and all that stuff. It's been kind of like a fear of mine, trying to avoid sounding like him, just because I don't know. That's something I've gotten advice from different players, like Flinner as well. He's been like, yeah, just like try to be your own player, try to listen to as many different artists as possible, because you are what you eat as a musician. I'm so glad it's coming across, man. That really means a lot. Likewise,
oh yeah,
it's
for
like,
sure.
It's cool, like seeing all the different personalities out there in the mandolin world. I'd put you right up there with all those other mandolin players we've been talking about too. So, likewise. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for spending the time with us today. It's been so fun getting to catch up, hang out. I hope folks will definitely go check out Love Away the Hate. The album's out April 5th, as well as the transcription book. Check out, you know, Andrew's tour schedule if you want to go see him live this year, or you know, any of the workshops that he's teaching at, and check out the Isolationist Guide to the Mandolin. You can get back access to all those workshops over on Andrew's website, right?
Yep. AndrewCollinstrio.com. All the answers to the world. Well, maybe not answers you want.
Well, thanks again, Andrew. It's been great.
All right, cheers. Thank you, David.